All right, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to MassIPL's Solar for Houses of Worship Open Forum. We're excited to have all of you, and it's certainly going to be an exciting year for solar. What we're going to do here in the next few minutes is let me get to my presentation here. There we go. We are going to, I'll just do a quick intro about MassIPL. I think most of you probably know a bit about us, but never hurts to just remind you. Then we're going to have a couple of very short presentations from a couple of houses of worship that are right in the middle of the process. And they both have some really interesting stories that I thought would be good for everyone to hear, touching on a lot of the issues that I know everyone has as they do a project like this. But as advertised, the bulk of the time will be then open for your questions and answers. So feel free to drop things in the chat. I see there is some chat in here already. Or when we get to that, raise your hand and we will get to that. All right. So a couple of just quick things. As most of you know, that Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light is a nonprofit devoted to helping houses of worship with lowering their carbon footprint, lowering their energy use and cost. We are part of a national interfaith power and light organization. And as our name says, interfaith, we are really members of all different faith traditions and denominations, but we all share this concern for creation. So I am glad to have you all here today, and we will all share that concern. And in terms of solar, we have been working with churches and synagogues and other houses of worship on solar for about 12 years or so now, maybe coming up on 13 soon. And what we offer is advice. Now this network of houses of worship that have gone this way, we have our partners with us today. In fact, we have our partners from Resonant Energy, Rachel Gentile and Leonard Schloer, who are around as we get into questions. If things come up that are really technical or get deep into the Smart Solar program, they will help us out with that. And really, it's all about helping all of you get over, there are barriers and hurdles and challenges to a project like this. And it's really about helping you be able to do this kind of a project. So far, there are, by my last count, 135 houses of worship in Massachusetts that have solar panels. So you're not alone, but there's over 3,000 houses of worship in the state. So we got a long way to go, but glad you're all here, and I hope you can, over the next months or year or so, help us boost that total. With that, I think that's sort of the end of my intro comments. What I will do now is I will call on Mike Marcinelli from Christchurch Andover to kick us off with his comments. And Mike, give me a second to, Michael, let me find you so I can promote you to a co-presenter. And then you will be able to share your slides. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. There you are. To host. Yes. All right. I'm stopping my share. And Michael, you should be able to share your slides now.
All right.
Perfect.
Can you all, I can see this?
Got it.
All right. So hello, folks. My name is Michael Marcinelli. I'm the solar champion for for Christchurch Andover. And I'm happy to share some of my story with solar at Christchurch with you. We're pretty excited about it over at Christchurch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first give you a brief introduction as to what we're doing at Christchurch Andover, and then I'll focus on sort of key issues and lessons learned about our journey through our solar project. So what we're doing at Christchurch is we have 4 buildings on our campus, and we're putting an array on all 4 of our buildings. And the total number of panels is 127 panels across the 4 buildings, which will yield a little over 52 kilowatts of DC solar production. This will cover roughly 85% of our total campus usage. And we, in our case, we decided to purchase a system rather than what's called a PPA or power purchase agreement, which is really you kind of just renting out your roof and getting a much smaller solar cost advantage. And we went with black on black panels in order to minimize the visual disruption. So just a brief overview of what the 4 arrays look like. So here you can see this is our church, and you know this these, I don't know if you could see my cursor. Jim, can you see my cursor moving?
No. Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay.
I can, yeah, can see it.
So here this we have a historic, all 4 of our buildings are historic buildings. So we had to go before the Andover Preservation Commission, which is our town's historic commission. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But because we have slate roof tiles, we decided to not put any arrays on the slate roof tiles for a couple of reasons. One is it would significantly increase the cost of the installation to put arrays on the slate roof tiles, but also we didn't want to disrupt the historic nature of this part of our church building. So the only array we have on the actual church building itself is on a rubber roof that was added about 40 years ago or so. And that's really not very visible from the street. So that made the Historic Commission pretty happy. But because it's a relatively small array compared to the energy usage of this building, which not only houses our worship, but also our daycare and other sort of office support. So that's only going to cover 30% of that particular building's usage. The rectory, which is just to the right of the church, is going to have a 22 panel array that's going to cover 161% of that building's electrical usage. Our office building that we call the Glebe House, which is to the right of the rectory, is going to have a 27 panel array, which will cover 200% of that electrical usage of that particular building. And then finally, we have a building in the town just up the street from where we are on Central Street. And this is going to be a 42 panel array covering 146% of that usage. And what National Grid does is National Grid aggregates all of those pluses and minuses to give us a total electrical savings of 85% of our electrical bill across the 4 buildings. So savings across the entire 30-year life of the system. The cost of the project is $208,000, and at the current rate, actually this is last year's rates, not National Grid just increased the rates quite dramatically this year. But as of last year's rate, the amount of electrical savings across the life of the system was $415,000, with a 3% increase, average increase, which is very conservative. That's we know now that that's very, very, very conservative, because the rate increase even this year is I don't know, 60% or whatever. So, we're going to save upwards of 750,000 or more over the life of the system. So net, the 208,000, that's a pretty significant savings of between 550 and 650K over the life of the system. So some of the key issues and lessons learned. So it took roughly a year for us to get to where we are now, where we have a signed deal with our vendor. We have all of our hurdles surmounted, namely the historic commission. We can talk about that in a little bit. They've approved the project. The solar vendor's engineering review has been completed, and we know that all 4 buildings are structurally sound to carry the weight of the solar panels. So how to keep the project going over a fairly long stretch of time is, you really kind of need to have a champion at the parish. Hopefully not the rector, but sometimes that is the rector. But you want to find a champion who's really going to kind of keep the process going and keep the energy, so to speak, no pun intended, going strong in the parish. Highly recommend seeking advice from folks like Jim Nail, who was very instrumental in getting us to where we're at now. Other churches who have done this. I've spoken to other champions at other churches, which have been very helpful to me. Engaging the parish early and generating excitement. We'll talk a little bit more about generating excitement around a project such as this. One way to do that is to seek out members in the parish that have a passion around environmental stewardship, and it probably isn't going to be hard to do with your parish. If you do have a property committee, I recommend engaging them early. That's actually a mistake that I made in my zeal for getting this project ushered through. I didn't engage the property committee as early as I should have, and I wish that I had done that. So if you do have a property committee, engage them early, and work with a vendor who you really kind of have confidence in, and a vendor that you can trust. And particularly, it's helpful to have a vendor who has experience working with nonprofits. And we do. We're working with 621 Energy, and because they have experience working with nonprofits, they know how we work, right? They know that money is always an issue. Securing funding takes time with nonprofits, and working with an organization that understands that is really very helpful. So some funding considerations. In our case, since we're an Episcopal church, the Eastern Diocese has 2 loans that an Episcopal parish can apply for: a Stokes loan and a Green loan that maxes out at 100,000 between the 2 loans. 150,000 between the 2 loans, 100,000 for each individual loan. But if you combine them like we did, it maxes out at 150K. But our diocese offers a 1.5% rate, which is pretty darn good. If you don't have access to that, there are several third-party loan opportunities that you're not going to get 1.5%, but you can get some pretty decent rates for third-party loans for solar these days. Another late-breaking development over the past several months is, when we started this process, we didn't have the new federal government law that allows for nonprofits to have a 30% direct rebate from the government. And prior to that, I was having to jump through hoops with, third-party financing from organizations like Collective Sun in California, where they would technically own the system, and they would kick back 12% of the rebate. They would keep the other 14% of the rebate for themselves as part of their business model. But all of that goes away with the new government rule, where we're able to apply directly for a 30% rebate. Selling it to your parish. So there's lots of really good selling points. Solar is obviously a very hot topic right now, and there's lots of positive energy around environmental stewardship and carbon reduction. In our case, because we have a pretty cheap loan, there's actually no impact on the budget at all, because the cost savings that we're realizing with electrical savings is in excess of our debt service on the loan. So there's literally no impact on the church budget. So there's really nothing to not really love about this project. So we're lucky in that sense. I guess that if there was one area of pushback, it's around what it's going to look like, especially if the arrays are highly visible to the street. We had to talk to the Historic Commission about that topic, and some parishioners about that topic. So that was probably the single most talked about issue around any form of pushback. So just quickly, finally, other key issues, roofing considerations. If you have a historic property, plan on adding some time to the process. You'll probably have to go before your town's historic commission and present to them. That's what we did, and we used our vendor was very instrumental in helping to do that presentation. They had lots of great mock-ups and slides, and we kind of did our homework ahead of time. And if you do have to go to the Historic Commission, I recommend notifying them in advance and sort of engaging them even before that meeting that you have with the commission. That's really helpful to engage them early, and be prepared with visuals and a nice sort of button-down presentation that'll help sell the Historic Commission. Tree removal. That's oftentimes going to be a topic, and that's a real consideration, because the removal of trees, the town may have questions around that. Your parishioners may have questions around the removal of trees. If they do obstruct any solar production on your roof, that's something to really consider. And that's a possible addition to the cost beyond the actual solar installation. And finally, sort of maintenance. Oftentimes with the tried and true equipment that we have these days, maintenance hasn't really been much of an issue for us. In our case, we were able to spend a fairly nominal up cost on getting a 25-year parts and labor warranty upgrade. So the maintenance really hasn't been, that was a big topic of conversation with the parish. What's this going to cost us, going forward? But that's been fairly minimal, with a fairly cheap upgrade to the warranty. And I guess I'll stop there.
Great. Michael, thank you.
Sure, Jim.
Touched on a lot of things. I'm sure a lot of that will come back in the Q&A. But one of the things that you touched on, which I know was a big topic in the decision at the Vineyard Assembly of God, was the whole Inflation Reduction Act 30% rebate from the government. So, Pastor Splitgerber, come in, give us your story.
Yeah, our journey was very similar to what Michael described. We began looking at solar about 2 years ago. And of course, then, about the only option we could look at was the PPA. We began working with a company called Freedom Forever, LLC, out of Florida. And basically, they were just a coordinating company that was going to link us with a solar installer and also with a PPA provider. They connected us with a PPA, Sunrun. Sunrun produced, actually for a PPA, they produced a very good proposal. Our deacons on our deacon board thought it was excellent. We signed the initial agreement with them pending congregational approval. And then Sunrun pulled out. They suddenly realized that we were a church, that we were a nonprofit. And their big question for us was, what happens to the debt? What happens to our investment into the PPA if the church goes under, becomes defunct? It didn't matter to them that we have a reversion clause in our constitution and bylaws where in the event the church does cease to function as a church, all of the church's assets and liabilities revert to our denominational headquarters. Didn't matter to them. So we lost out on that PPA, and that just kind of just put the whole situation on pause for a while. Then we continued to work and found another PPA company that was operated more by a private financier. He provided us with a PPA. That was KKL Energy Solutions, LLC. And his proposal, right away, we all looked at it and we thought, this does not look good. It doesn't feel right, doesn't sit right. He was going to be charging us a higher rate for the electricity with an annual 2% escalator built into the cost. At that point, I began to do some more research online, and I stumbled across Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light. I reached out to them. Jim very kindly got back to me and said, hey, send me that PPA and let me take a look at it. I did. He got right back to me and said, yeah, your instincts were right. This is not a good deal for the church. Then Jim let us know about the Inflation Recovery Act, which we did not know about this provision with the solar and the green energy for houses of worship. That became the game changer for us. Suddenly, we began to seriously look at doing our own financing. It helped then that with our local bank here on Martha's Vineyard, one of the vice presidents is in our congregation. So he was able to secure us a very good rate for about 85% of the project cost. The remaining 15% we were able to finance directly from the church savings. And then we took that to the congregation and we presented with them with the resolution empowering the church board to go ahead and secure that financing and pursue with the solar installation. And really for our church, because our building is a newer building, it's not a historical site. The main question for the congregation was, is this affordable? Is this doable? Is it going to benefit the church in the long run financially? And are we sure that the 30% from the government is going to come through? And we were able, especially with the input from Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light, we were able to reassure the congregation of that. The vote was unanimous from our congregation to pursue the financing and to install the solar. We had already begun to make some moves with that, in that we did have to have 10 trees taken down along the south side of our property. It actually worked out good. We did have to get town approval to do it, but it was a no-brainer. The town was fully in support of us going solar. They also looked at the fact that a year and a half ago, the island got hit by a nor'easter and several of the large oak and sassafras trees that we had to have removed were damaged. Some of the limbs came down very close to our building, and so they were able to deem the trees as unsafe. And so we had them removed. And what really worked out nicely for us was we approached a tree removal company here on the island, and the going rate here was generally about $1,500 per tree. So this was going to cost us quite a bit. The tree removal company did it all pro bono, took all the trees down at no cost to the church. I had them leave the wood here. and we cut it up for firewood that some of our parishioners who heat with wood are taking. And so it all just became a win-win-win right across the board for us. So we are right now moving forward with a local island company, Harvest Sun Solar. They're taking care of hooking us up with the SMART program. They're taking care of the entire permitting process for us. So at this point, all we have to do is make sure they get their checks on time according to their schedule of payments, and we're good to go. And so that's how easy it was for us once we learned of that Inflation Recovery Act. So that's about it for me. So back to you, Jim.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. What a great story. Now, when do you have an estimated date of completion yet, or is it still too early?
It's still a little bit too early, but we are anticipating to be online and generating power by May.
Mm-hmm. Great. I see a couple of questions coming in. Excellent. Keep them coming. But I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative here, because since we have been talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, I'm going to call on my friend and colleague, Leonard Schloer from Resonant, to talk a bit about what he knows about that, because I think that is a topic that a lot of us are concerned about and hoping to take advantage of. So Leonard, let me get you in here as a co-host so that you can share. I know you've got a couple slides there you can share, and you should be able to do that. And then we'll keep those cards and letters coming in through the chat. And I see a couple of hands raised. We'll get right to those after we learn a bit more about the IRA.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. Can everyone see the slides? Okay?
Got it.
Great. Yeah, so it's great to be here. My name is Leonard Schloer. I'm on the outreach team with Resonant Energy. We're a Dorchester-based solar developer. We believe we've done about a third of the houses of worship solar installs in Massachusetts. So I think we know a fair bit about this arena. But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. I think it's been thrown around, the 30% reimbursement or rebate. So that's a big deal. Obviously, this was a federal legislation that was passed in August, and not via executive order. This was this was voted on by the House and the Senate. So this isn't something that is just flipping the next time we have a different president. And it's a 10-year. It's 10 years of legislation with this baseline of a 30%. We'll call it a tax credit, but for the purposes of houses of worship, we call it direct pay. So it's a reimbursement, it's a rebate. And Michael, I'd be curious from your perspective when you anticipate receiving that direct pay. But I'll let you step in there.
Yeah, no, I'm not expecting to receive it until 2024, actually.
Yeah, and that's what we're telling most of our clients as well. So it's thinking about it maybe in sort of the next tax year, as if you were getting a tax rebate on taxes you might be paying. But of course, you're not paying taxes, and so it's still money coming back from the federal government, which takes time. So Leonard, yeah, we looked. Oh, please.
Yeah, have you guys heard any more about? I know the various agencies and departments in the government are in the process of writing all the rules. Do you have any insight or heard anything about when all those specifics will actually be published?
Yeah, it's supposed to be in the next few weeks. That was the deadline was mid to late February, I believe, all the way back in August. I fingers crossed that they actually meet that timeline, but it's we're supposed to hear pretty soon. And so in terms of what we'll learn, one of the big pieces is actually kind of an additional bonus to that baseline 30%. So for houses of worship in what are called new market tax credit areas, so essentially low-income communities, you're able to receive up to a 40% rebate, which is pretty significant, obviously. And so that is something that feel free to, we can kind of hand off a link that shows what areas might qualify. It's not it's sort of parts of towns. It's not just sort of broad swaths. There's a bit of complication there. And again, we'll hear in the next couple of weeks exactly how one qualifies. For these adders, there are also caps. So only a certain amount of additional credit will be essentially allocated, but everybody can receive the 30% without any cap. In general, this is meant really a game changer for direct purchases, as both of prior speakers have mentioned. You'd have to deal with what was called hybrid ownership, or this collective sons model in the past, and now you can really own the system yourself. I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to PPAs, because I feel like they get a little bit of they get punched down a little bit. PPAs can be a great option if your church or house of worship is not really simply can't come up with the funds or the loan. And PPA discounts have also gone up in the wake of this legislation as well. So if you saw PPA, I heard about a 2% escalator. We're not doing that anymore. Certainly, they should look closer to a 1% escalator, and certainly discounts of at least 15% up to, we're seeing 50% year one utility discounts on some larger sites with southern facing roofs in maybe the greater Boston area or in Cape Cod, where some of the state incentives are higher. So it really depends on site to site, but PPAs can be an option as well.
Well, that's good to hear about the discount potentially being higher, because obviously, when the PPA owner gets that 30% discount, it's good that they're going to pass some of that on through that discount. So cool. Let us get to some of the rest of these questions here. And Leonard, thank you. I see you already answered one that was a question about, what is the electrical equipment needed for that connection. And let's see, that came from Charles. Did that give you the answer you need, or do you have any other follow-ups on that? If you do, go ahead and send that in.
Yeah, did not answer my question.
Okay, well,
Just what type of electrical interface do you have to construct in and around your building?
Well, the parish owner doesn't have to worry about that. That's all handled by National Grid or whoever your electrical company. What they do is they install what's called a net meter in the case of National Grid, and they replace your meter with a net meter that has an ability to go backwards, which is really fun to watch. I have a solar installation at my house, and I could watch those numbers spin backwards on a sunny day, which is really kind of fun. But they replace your meter with a net meter, and that's how your solar interface from your inverter goes into your breaker through the net meter and then out to National Grid, and you'll get credited if you're for whatever solar production you get gets credited to your bill automatically.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And I see there was a question here about putting panels on a parking lot rather than a roof because they have a slate roof. And again, Leonard, you jumped in and answered that yes, that kind of installation also qualifies for the Inflation Reduction Act rebate. And we've seen a number of those kinds of installations. And I'm going to go back to my presentation here for 1 second, because I have one example here. And let me go to that slide. You can see here at the bottom of the screen a couple of examples, but at the bottom of here, the Congregation Beth Elohim, which I believe is Acton, you can see they put some parking canopies or some canopies over their parking lot in the back there. And I think that's if I remember right, that's about 130 kilowatt installation. So it's one of the larger installations at any house of worship in the state. So yeah, if you've got a good parking lot like that, that is an excellent opportunity. One follow-up question, Pastor Splitgerber, for you. Can you give us a little more detail about the payoff term for your installation? Will it pay itself back in what, 6, 7, 8 years, something like that?
Yeah. The loan we took out itself is a 10-year term. However, we're anticipating paying off that loan far earlier, using that 30% rebate. As far as the payback generated from the system, we're looking at within 6 to 8 years, because our system is designed to generate 104% at peak of our usage.
Great. Question about roofs here. So we have a 23-year-old shingle roof on our parish house. We would normally wait 6 or 7 more years to implement solar, but is there a merit in doing it sooner? Possible, sunset of the 30% rebate from the government. I'll just jump in, and like my personal preference is, sooner is always better for solar. Certainly from the climate change standpoint, the sooner you're using carbon-free electricity, the better it is for the planet. And quite frankly, at 23 years old, those shingles don't owe you much. And sure, maybe you could eke a few more years out of them. But if you go ahead and replace them, most shingles, asphalt shingles, have guarantees of say 20 to 25 years. So like I said, they've sort of earned their keep. So it's not like they're 10 years old and you're replacing them 10 or 15 years ahead of their expected replacement time. So I hope you will consider that. But Michael, Pastor, any of your thoughts on shingling and that kind of roofing issue?
Yeah, I'll jump in with our experience. So we had 4 roofs that we had to consider. 2 of them were rubber membranes, and 2 of them were asphalt shingles. So we were told by our provider that you want to have at least 20 years of life, or they won't even install panels on our roofs unless they had at least 20 years, 20 to 25 years of life left on them, because you don't want to be in a situation where you need to replace shingles after your arrays are installed. That's not a situation you want to be in. So in our case, we did replace one of the 2 rubber roofs, the roof on our commercial building in downtown Andover on Park Street. We did decide to spend the money on replacing that rubber membrane roof because that was near end of life. It had maybe 5 years of life left on it, and we decided to go ahead and proactively replace that roof. The other roofs had in excess of 25 years or longer, so we didn't have to worry about those other ones, but we did replace one.
Great. There's another question, Michael, that I think is relevant to you. Is net metering only offsetting usage from the building that has the panels installed, or inclusion of other campus buildings that do not have solar installed on them? Now, in your case, you're sharing among all the buildings that have some solar on them, but I don't think it would be any different if some of those buildings did or didn't have solar on them, but that's part of, again, that process with your utility, right?
Yeah, and in our case, each the utility considers them to be 4 separate buildings, 4 separate projects, 4 separate systems. And the reason why we're able to get an aggregation is that all of those 4 buildings are really kind of coming into one client from one National Grid client. So we kind of, it aggregates into one bill, but they're really kind of four completely separate systems with separate meters that have their own either, plus or minuses in terms of what solar is doing to that one building.
Mhm. Right. And that's, this kind of leads into a couple of questions about what's going on with the state SMART program as well. But, part of the whole, governing regulation of this is the ability, if you are generating excess, you can sell it to others and transfer what are called on-bill credits through a process called Schedule Z. Just some, paperwork, you've got the government and utilities here, so of course there will be paperwork. But if you have excess, you can share it to another building, again, on your campus, or, to someone else. I know there was a church out in Framingham very early on, one of the first churches to do solar that I knew of, had a lot of excess, and they ended up selling their excess to other churches nearby to them. But Leonard, maybe I'll bring you in on, can you give us the latest on the SMART program? And there was one specific question about, are SRECs still in play?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Jim. So two pieces to that. So are SRECs still in play? The answer is no. If you're receiving SRECs from a kind of an older array, you're still receiving them until that period ends. But we now have what's called the SMART program, which for most houses of worship in most areas in Massachusetts amounts to cash payments. So a little bit more kind of guaranteed income versus the SRECs, which were sold on a marketplace and you weren't necessarily guaranteed certain levels of revenue. I will note that in some parts of, we're seeing in some parts of central and western Mass, some smaller sites are no longer, it's no longer as beneficial to take advantage of the SMART program. And instead, we are suggesting that you just receive what's called Class 1 RECs, which functions similarly to SRECs, except it is essentially valued a little bit, has a lower value than SRECs. But so there's both the SMART program, which is still moving along smoothly in most of the state, and then in some parts of the state where essentially the SMART program has filled up its capacity, we're suggesting or we're recommending just taking advantage of the Class 1 RECs, which RECs stand for renewable energy credits. So, and those are sold also on a marketplace for revenue.
Another question about that, are there any state rebates or state loans, particularly that, nonprofits and houses of worship can access? I'm not aware of any, but.
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen different, all sorts of different programs coming from, what was it? The DPU, I think, did a GAP grant program, which was targeting affordable housing. And there's been all sorts of state rebates, and I think some of them come and go and fluctuate. In terms of kind of a baseline state incentive, that's what the SMART program is designed to be. I will say that the increase to the federal incentive, this direct pay, has sort of kind of raised the all waters in Massachusetts, meaning Western Mass and Central Mass are still receiving. If you could still receive 30 to 40% off of your array, it almost doesn't matter how big or small your SMART payments are these days.
Mm-hmm. Great. And here in the chat, this is an interesting comment back to the replacing the roof comment that, the south-facing roof usually takes the most beating from the sun, and that tends to, be needing replacement first. So, if the rest of the roof is in good condition, maybe you just replace that south roof where the panels are going to be and let the others go. So if, I'm sure that also has to do with the physical layout of the roof and things, but that's a really interesting idea that certainly worth exploring. And now, question about batteries. So is that worth adding to a system at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that question a lot. I think we may have spoken about it last year as well. It continues to be not cost effective. I don't want to call it not cost effective, but it is not essentially it's not as revenue generating as solar is. So right now, solar, we're seeing internal rates of return between 10 and 18% on some sites. Adding battery reduces that. There are state incentives for battery storage. But right now, mostly batteries are a great idea if you're interested in resilience and interested in having your buildings be maybe a community center in a time of need where power's out in the community and you're able to host folks, or if you have a few essential appliances that need to remain on during blackouts, batteries can be a great option. But in terms of revenue or in terms of cost effectiveness, not yet, essentially.
Yeah. Right. Probably.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say we decided to not go that route, really for the same reason that Leonard said. It doesn't really help your it doesn't help you from a revenue standpoint. All it is just it's an expensive energy source if you go out of power. But it comes at a pretty high premium because batteries are pretty expensive, right? They're going to come down. It's another reason why we didn't do it, is that the battery technology is changing so quickly and the prices are coming down so quickly that investing in batteries now we felt was not a good idea.
I'll just add as well that batteries in states that don't have as favorable net metering programs or net metering like programs, thinking of Georgia, for example, where you're really paying different prices. Everybody might be paying different prices depending on the time of the day that you're drawing the electricity. And maybe there's lower incentives for solar. In those sorts of states, batteries can make more sense. But because we're in Massachusetts, we've been speaking a little bit about net metering. Those are generally month over month rollover as opposed to hour by hour, for example, where a battery might make more sense.
Great. What about EV charging stations? I know there are some incentives for that. Is there any like combination incentive if you're doing solar and installing a charging station and you're some sort of public institution, whether it's house of worship or something else?
There is EV charging incentives. There are EV charging incentives. I will post in the chat. I'll take just a quick look because I'm blanking on the name of it. But we're working with some of those right now. But they can be EV charging and solar makes a great pairing as well.
Yeah, I believe that National Grid has they help you financially with that because it's part of their mandate to offer renewable energy EV charging capacity. So my understanding, again, we didn't decide to do this at our campus, but when I was looking into it, I believe that National Grid is one of probably many sources of support for anybody thinking about that.
Yeah. Another question here relating to that sharing of energy, and again, I think Rachel, you jumped in to answer this. Can we choose who we share our excess energy with? We have 3 parishes in our collaborative. One has a clay tile roof, so not optimal for solar. That again is, I mentioned this Schedule Z process, and that is exactly, you get to specify who you share that power with, and that is the paperwork that then allows the utility to know who to apply those, what they call on-bill credits from your account, because they look at the world through, utility accounts, from your account to another account. The only restrictions are, which probably don't apply here, but it does have to be within the same what's called load zone. I think that's still accurate, right, Leonard? But those are pretty big geographic areas, and they do have to be within the same utilities. So if you're on National Grid and one of your collaborative partners is in Eversource, I don't think you could share across that. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Leonard.
No, you're correct there. Yeah.
but that's certainly something that, I can help you with. And, if you are interested in having Resonant Energy take a look at your project, or, one of our other partners, your solar installer can definitely help you make sure that you do that right. And I love this question. After solar installation, is anyone thinking of implementing air source heat pumps and air source hot water heating to lower reliance on natural gas fired systems? Boy, I sure hope so. MassIPL is certainly encouraging that all along the way.
And I would jump in to say as well, one of the biggest reasons why we are sometimes unable to move forward with supporting a project is because electricity usage, there isn't enough electricity usage to warrant a larger array. So switching or planning to switch to air source heat pumps, air source, I believe, heat pump, hot water, electric hot water, all that sort of thing. Definitely you can get incentives from the state to switch. The lean, I'm not sure if the lean program is for houses of worship, but there's a number of different incentives available. And that pairs really nicely with solar as well.
Exactly. Yeah, the Mass Save program has rebates per ton of heat pump capacity for a heat pump hot water heater that, you get that straight through your installer. And yeah, I've been doing a couple of what we call our environmental stewardship assessments, which is the MassIPL version of an energy audit for houses of worship. And there's a couple of houses of worship we're talking about that, are looking at older systems, maybe not quite, heating systems, maybe not quite, on its last legs. So, we're talking with them about, great, get the solar done first, then, size it so that when you do replace those heating systems and move to heat pump, that you'll have capacity on your solar panels to cover that as well. So definitely a good thing to be thinking about and trying to plan for going ahead. This question always comes up too. Where is the solar panel technology at? Are there new panel designs in the future? And, ultimately that's like, should we wait, and will there be, much more efficient panels coming out in a few years? Kind of like the discussion we had about batteries, where batteries do seem to be on that early trend of there's going to be new technologies, they're going to get cheaper. And if you wait, maybe there's advantage there. But does that apply at all to solar panels, do you think, Leonard?
Yeah, so I think batteries are at a much earlier stage than panels are. We've kind of we've kind of leveled out a little bit in terms of solar panel improvements. It's getting slowly better year by year. I think where there's interesting new technologies happening in solar is not necessarily relevant to rooftop solar, and it's more thinking about how we integrate solar with usable farmland, for example, without just clearing land and putting out panels in a green field. So, and putting solar on water reservoirs, for example. So lots of different kind of interesting ways to use panels, but in terms of the panel technology, just slight improvements year over year at this point.
Leonard, I'm a total geek on these things, so I follow all sorts of things, and there are some technologies that people are very excited about. Oh crap, I'm blanking on the one. But there's a lot of things that are kind of in the lab, and in the lab they look really good, and then there's probably a 5 to 10 year process of taking them from lab scale to pilot scale to full production. And many things don't, you just find out for some reason the physics or the manufacturing requirements don't allow some of these things to actually hit scale. But certainly I've seen that the solar panels, the cost of solar panels has come down a lot. I put solar panels on my church in 2013. So we actually leased to them. We're coming up to the end of our 10-year lease, so we will be buying them out. But when we put them on, they were close to, the the sort of benchmark way to look at them is the cost per watt. So they were about $5 per watt in 2013. And I know these days it's more like $3 a watt, $3.25 a watt is what I've been seeing. And that's even up a little bit because of all the supply chain and crazy stuff going on in the world. So, you know, the solar panel industry has squeezed a lot of those efficiencies and cost out. So, yeah, and with nothing dramatically better that is imminent, you know, to hit the market. And here's a question, kind of goes back to our last discussion about transitioning to heat pumps. And the question is, are you phasing out fossil fuel heating entirely? And is the solar capacity relative to current use or planned with nearly all electric heating? You know, and that's, that question is a big one. And generally, I think most people are keeping a fossil fuel backup system for like that really ridiculously cold weather we had a couple of weeks ago. I think people are keeping those for, you know, the comfort and for the security of knowing they can always fall back on it if something really happens. But there was an article in the Globe right after that really cold weekend where they talked to, I think they talked to over 400 people with heat pumps to see, well, how did they do? Did they really deliver? And generally they did just fine. And a lot of the newer heat pump equipment is rated to deliver its full heating capacity down to about, you know, 0 or possibly even below 0. So you really just have to, you know, make sure you're picking the right equipment and making sure that your installer is representing those brands and those particular models that have that. The question that is still on my mind is in our sanctuary spaces and our big spaces. Those just require so many BTUs of heat that it can be challenging for heat pumps alone to heat those spaces adequately. So again, another consideration to talk through with your HVAC contractors as you're looking at a project like that. Let's see what else is coming in. Thank you, Paul. Is MassIPL planning a presentation on adopting heat pumps at houses of worship? Let me work on that. I think that, you know, that is a good topic. So thanks for that idea. Stay tuned. Can you, this is to me, can you share your methodology for assessing buyout of 12-year-old panels? Sure. So as I said, you know, our panels are 10 years old. They will certainly be producing electricity for the next 10 to 15 years. Our current lease payment is around $4,000 per year. So when we buy them out, which will be, it's about a $20,000, because it's a lease, so it's a little bit different than a PPA, but it's about a $20,000 payment. So we take that $4,000 or so off of our budget. So there it pays back in, it pays back that buyout in 5 years. We actually did a capital campaign a few years ago, and that was included as one of the projects. So we have the cash on hand to do that. Otherwise, the leasing company could renew the lease, but it obviously would be at new rates, and given the interest rates these days, I expect that would be much higher. But one of the other considerations too was that you know, from a climate standpoint and being, you know, we passed a resolution a number of years ago that we wanted to be net zero carbon by 2025. And with a lease, and that lease owner owns, we were still in the SREC period when those were installed. So that lease owner owned the SREC, so they're selling the SREC. So if you get technical about the way renewable energy credits work, we can't claim to have zero carbon electricity if someone else is owning and selling the SRECs. We buy the panels, we own the SRECs. Well, the SRECs expire in 10 years anyway. So, so now we own the system, we own the carbon reduction. And because much of our building is heated with currently with resistance electric heating, that will, cover the vast majority of our carbon footprint. So a couple of considerations there. Oh, Mark, thank you for this. We have a geothermal for a 3-bedroom ranch, and the -11-degree weather triggered resistance heat mode for only a short span of time. So that's really interesting. Yeah, and geothermal, ground source heat pumps, they do have a bit of an advantage where you're dealing with more constant temperature. And so the air temperature in that case had, much more smaller effect on your ground source system than it would have on an air source system. Leonard, thank you for coming. He had to jump off to get on to some other business, but really appreciate Leonard sharing his knowledge and answers to some of those questions. Jump in here. Eversource territory looks like their new net metering tariff gives us 100% only up to 10 kilowatt, 25 kilowatt 3-phase, and then it drops to 60% for any exported power. Is this common? Yes, I mean, that is a new requirement. And this is a case where now you might want to look at batteries, because if you keep that, if they're only going to pay you 60%, if you're saving all that power and pulling from your batteries instead of pulling from the grid, that may change the economics of the batteries. A church from Holden, municipal power and light company. The 30% federal rebate, I believe, is still in effect. I think that's one of those things you may want to just check when the final regulations are issued, but I don't see any reason why in that case a municipal P&L would have any effect on that. The SMART program is not available in municipal territories. The SMART program is funded by and managed by the the investor-owned utilities. So therefore, the municipal utilities do not participate in that. Oh, good. Another heat pump experience here. I have -13 Fahrenheit heat pump effectiveness, but in my 120-year-old house, the very high winds at -14 mean the home cooled to 50 degrees Fahrenheit in some rooms. I needed the gas-fired steam radiators for 24 hours to warm all the rooms to normal. Yeah, so that's that example of having that backup system just in case we get these crazy weather, and we all know with climate change, crazy weather is the new normal. So that is interesting. Well, we are a little bit after 1 o'clock. I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment. So last call for questions. Otherwise, we will close this out. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. Great questions. I hope this you picked up some good tips and tricks from both Michael and Pastor Splitgerber about how you can advance a project like this in your house of worship. Obviously be in touch with me, or I know Leonard shared his contact information as well. And I'm sure Michael and Pastor Splitgerber would also be willing to connect with you offline if you have any other questions. So, all right. I see a couple of thank you messages coming in. So great. With that, have a great Valentine's Day and enjoy, and hope you have some good plans with your loved ones this evening to celebrate that. and show some love to solar too. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.